All right, let's dive into some seriously spooky stuff today. Appalachian folk magic.
Hmm.
But not the love spells and good luck charms. We're going full-on dark side. Black magic, curses, hexes, you name it. And you guys gave us a treasure trove of sources this time.
Oh, yeah, this is going to be good. We've got those creepy YouTube channels, spirits and ghost stories, and witchy corner productions.
Right, and then some deeper dives with Linnea Droon and Ella Harrison.
Even some stuff from Google Playbooks really paints a vivid picture.
A pretty terrifying picture, if you ask me. But before we get lost in the shadows, let's back up a sec. What exactly is Appalachian folk magic? Like, what sets it apart from other magical traditions?
Well, it's all about practicality. Survival, really. Think about those isolated mountain communities. Limited resources, relying on what they had to get by. Folk magic was their answer to everything. Healing, protection, even, yeah, messing with their enemies a little.
Bit of a magical Swiss Army knife, huh?
Hmm.
But with a dark side, like we said.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, right? What makes this magic black? Is it just about bad intentions?
Well, yeah, I'd assume so. We're not talking about, like, brewing a tea for cold. We're talking about deliberately causing harm.
Right. But it's not always so simple. The sources emphasize this idea of justified magic, retaliation, but it's got to be proportional, an eye for an eye kind of thing.
So even in black magic, there's a moral code, like a magical version of an eye for an eye.
You could say that. But even then, things can get blurry. And the consequences. Let's just say you don't want to mess around with this stuff lightly.
Okay, no playing around with dark forces.
Got it.
No, it's those real-life stories from the sources that really send shivers down my spine. That YouTuber from Spirits and Ghost Stories, the one who ran into that creature in the woods.
Oh, yeah, that was a creepy one. That towering dog-like thing, but with human features. Talk about nightmare fuel.
Yeah.
And that stench of rotting flesh. No, thank you. Ugh, don't remind me. Maybe double check all the closets in my house, I'll tell you that. Do you think all those stories about creatures in the shadows? Do you think that comes from how isolated and rugged the Appalachian region is?
I mean, isolation breeds fear, right? And those dark forests and hollows, perfect setting for tales of the unknown and the unsettling.
Okay, well, speaking of unsettling, let's talk about some of those black magic practices from the sources. That egg binding spell caught my eye. Sounds pretty intense.
Ah, yes, the egg binding spell. Classic sympathetic magic. You're acting on an object to influence a person or even a habit. Pretty powerful stuff.
So, like, if I had a noisy neighbor, I could write their name on an egg, wrap it up, freeze it, and then smash it to smithereens.
Theoretically, yes. But we're talking about energies here, intentions. It's not a game to be played lightly.
Yeah.
And even if some people scoff at the idea, this stuff's deeply rooted in Appalachian culture. Respect is key.
Respect for sure, but also a healthy dose of skepticism, right? We're talking about a world where belief and real-world consequences get tangled up pretty easily. Absolutely. You got to think critically when you're dealing with these shadowy realms. That's what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating.
More like terrifying, if you ask me. But hey, that's part of the appeal, right? Okay, before we get too lost in the darkness, let's shift gears a bit. What about those granny witches? They seem like key players in all of this.
Oh, for sure. Granny witches are central to Appalachian folk magic. They embody both the healing and the darker aspects of the tradition, hold on to ancient knowledge, passed down through generations.
Like those wise women in villages, but with a magical twist.
Exactly. They were healers, midwives, advisors, but they also held the keys to some seriously potent magic, both good and bad. Like they walked the line between the ordinary and the supernatural.
So respected, but also kind of feared.
You got it. People sought them out in times of need, but also whispered about their powers. And their practices were all about resourcefulness, using what they had, herbs, roots, everyday objects, turning them to charms and spells.
And that whole connection to the spirit world, talking to the dead, seeing the future, that's enough to make even a skeptic like me wonder.
Speaking of skeptics, I sense a bit of doubt creeping in. Maybe we need to dive into some specific granny witch practices to really illustrate their power.
All right, lay it on me. I'm ready for those aha moments. But don't expect me to go soft on you.
Challenge accepted. Let's explore the world of granny witch healing, where folk medicine and magic blend in the most fascinating ways.
Okay, now you've got my attention. But don't get too cocky. I'm still waiting for those mind-blowing revelations.
Patience, patience. We're just getting started. This journey into Appalachian folk magic. Oh, it's going to be unforgettable, trust me. You know, before we jump headfirst into those granny witches, you mentioned something earlier. about skepticism and how beliefs can actually have
Oh,
consequences.
right. Like how I'm trying to hold on to logic even when we're talking about all this supernatural stuff. Yeah, I haven't completely given up on that yet, but I'm all ears.
Well, one of the YouTubers, Richie Corner Productions, they shared an experience that really highlights this. They were talking about doing a protection spell, and their fear, like their anxiety about bad stuff happening, it actually seemed to attract more trouble.
Wait, so you're saying that worrying about being cursed could actually make you more likely to have bad luck?
Exactly. It's like our thoughts and intentions have power, whether we're trying to direct them or not. And in Appalachian folk magic, where the spiritual and the practical are all mixed up, that power can get amplified big time.
Whoa. It's like, are we shaping reality with our beliefs? Or are we just noticing stuff that already fits with what we think?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The sources definitely suggest that in Appalachian folk magic, belief is a key ingredient.
Okay, belief might be part of it. But these granny witches weren't just sitting around thinking positive thoughts all day. They were out there using herbs and whatever they could find to make those remedies and charms.
Oh, absolutely. That practicality is what makes this tradition so cool. It's like this blend of pragmatism and spirituality, totally grounded in the land and its resources.
So let's talk specifics. What kind of plants and herbs were they using? Especially for the darker stuff.
The sources mention a bunch, each with its own, like, folklore and properties. Devil shoestring
Yeah.
supposedly wards off evil and protects against curses. And then there's graveyard dust, collected from, well, graveyards, used in spells related to death and binding.
Hold up. Graveyard dust. That's taking things to a whole new level of creepy. Sounds like something out of a horror movie.
Maybe. But remember, in Appalachian folk magic, there's often a connection between the ingredients and what you're trying to do. You're harnessing the power of those elements to get a specific result.
Right, right. I get the logic, even if it still gives me the chills.
Hmm.
What about animal parts? They mentioned using robin eggs and feathers for magic because of the robin's connection to Christ's suffering.
Yeah. The robin is interesting. It shows how folklore and religion are all woven together in Appalachian folk magic. There's also the donkey's cross. That darker patch of fur on a donkey's back, believed to be, like, sanctified by Christ riding into Jerusalem.
Wait, you're telling me that wearing hairs from a donkey's back can cure you? I'm not sure I'm buying that one.
Oh,
But it's fascinating how these beliefs are just part of everyday life.
totally. It's a worldview where the natural and the supernatural are all connected, where everyday stuff can have this deep spiritual meaning.
So how did these granny witches learn their craft? Was there, like, a school for witches or something?
Not exactly. It was mostly an oral tradition, knowledge passed down from mother to daughter or from a mentor to a chosen apprentice. It wasn't about reading spells from books, but about learning by doing, by watching, and by trusting your gut.
So more about connecting with the land, the spirits, all those subtle energies.
Exactly. And that connection is what made the Granny Witches so special. They were the bridge between the worlds, keepers of that ancient wisdom, and they could wield some serious magic.
But let's be honest, not every granny witch was a saint. Some of them used their powers for bad stuff, right?
Oh, for sure. The sources hint at rivalries between Granny Witches, curses, hexes, spells gone wrong. It reminds us that power can be dangerous no matter where it comes from.
And even in those remote mountains, human nature always finds a way to stir up trouble.
Ain't that the truth? And as we dive deeper into those darker Granny Witch practices, well, let's just say things are about to get even more interesting.
Okay, now I'm hooked. Officially both fascinated and a little terrified. Bring on those darker practices. What kind of spells and rituals are we talking about here?
Now that's where the real fun begins. You're not going to want to miss this.
Okay, spill the beans. What kind of dark magic did those granny witches get up to?
Well, we've touched on the egg binding spell, but it gets even more specific. Like, if someone wanted to shut up a gossipy neighbor,
Uh-oh, sounds harsh. What do they do?
they might use a version of that egg binding spell, but focus it on the mouth. Write the person's name on the egg, wrap the thread around it like it's their mouth, freeze it solid, and bam, smash it.
Yikes, that's a powerful image. It seems like so much of Appalachian black magic is about that whole, effects-like idea.
Exactly. And the sources give some seriously creepy examples, like burying personal items to curse someone, hair, nail clippings, pieces of clothing, you name it.
Hold on, so you bury those things, and it's like you're burying the person's health or happiness. It's kind of like a voodoo doll, but with a more personal and way creepier
Yeah,
vibe.
it gets pretty intense. The sources are kind of vague on the details, but they do mention using poppets, those little figures that represent a person. They'd make them out of personal stuff and use them for all sorts of dark magic.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It's scary how far people are willing to go to hurt others.
Hmm.
It really shows the dark side of human nature.
It does. But remember, in Appalachian folk magic, there's often this idea of karma. What goes around comes around, and it hits you 3 times harder.
So those who practice black magic, they're playing a risky game.
Oh, definitely. The sources are full of stories about spells backfiring, curses rebounding on the caster. Messing with magic can have some serious unintended consequences. It's like a warning to be careful. And maybe even a little afraid.
Fear is a good thing sometimes, right? Keeps us from doing stupid stuff. But I gotta admit, I'm still kind of drawn to the mystery, the power of it all. Maybe it's just human nature to be curious about the forbidden.
Curiosity is a good thing, too. It pushes us to explore and learn. But yeah, you gotta be smart about it. Skeptical, but also open-minded.
Right. I mean, we're talking about a tradition that's been passed down for generations. There's got to be some truth to it, even if it doesn't make sense logically.
Exactly. It forces us to question what we think we know, to be open to the possibility that there's more to the world than meets the eye.
So where does all of this leave us? We've explored the dark side of Appalachian folk magic, the beliefs, the practices, the dangers. What should our listeners take away from all of this?
I think the big takeaway is that Appalachian folk magic, whether it's for good or for bad, it reflects who we are as humans, our desires, our fears, our capacity for both good and evil.
It's a reminder that magic isn't just about spells. It's about belief, about how we're all connected, about the choices we make that shape our lives.
Well said. And as we wrap up our deep dive into the shadows of Appalachian folk magic, I hope we've left everyone with a sense of wonder, maybe a little bit of fear, and a desire to keep learning.
Yeah, and maybe even a new appreciation for the magic that's all around us, just waiting to be discovered. Until next time, folks, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the magic alive.